2 hour session. Do we at some point do we want to take a 5 minute bio break, or do we just want to hunker and push on through?
I think yes, we will need that.
Okay. That sounds like a great plan.
And that was the well, here it's the 7 a.m. bell. What are we working on? Is it like the, I forget how far behind UTC I am. Yeah, it's a 4 a.m. bell for you. Europe is doing pretty well at like 11 or noon or so, right? But a few more minutes for the North American crowd to trickle in.
I see we're at 59 so far.
Yeah. And session 1 was like 120-ish?
I think we actually got up to, at one point I thought I saw 166.
Okay, yeah. So
let's
at least hit 100 before you start running your spiel.
Yeah, I don't see the West Coast. I see a few. I see Tommy Polly. Hello, Tommy. A few West Coasters around. And yes, Eric. Hello, Mr. Vink.
Hello, Mr. Dean.
All right, the coffee is starting to kick in. Awesome.
I'm so envious that coffee actually has a noticeable effect on you.
I'm not a real coffee drinker, so when I do get it, I get, I'm a cheap caffeine. But I figured for a 4 a.m. session, coffee was a good choice.
Med, are we starting off with Med? Should he? I mean, we're not going to start right now, but if we're starting off, you should be ready to go. So Med,
yeah. So
whatever you need.
Yeah. So we're gonna continue off where we left off with the DNR draft on Monday, or sorry, on Tuesday. And I'll pull that up in a minute. So just so people have a heads up, we'll be talking about this. And I believe we were at this next slide was going to be the next slide, but that will be once we get through the front matter.
Actually, I sent you an updated set of slides, Glenn, and I sent you a mail to upload them on the data tracker.
Sorry, say that again.
We updated the slides, and I sent you a note to accept them.
Oh, okay. Give me a few minutes. Are there significant changes? Because I'll have to go to data tracker and do all of that.
Then you can do the screen access to Med and he can present it.
I prefer to keep this all one screen instead of trying to switch around like that. Can you email me? Can you just email me the slides quickly?
Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah, the slides were updated just to highlight the comments that we received yesterday and the possible solutions that we thought about and what's the next steps to address them.
Sure. Okay. Of course, Outlook decides to crash right when I go to get your slides. I don't think it looks awake yet for me. All right. All right, so I've got to look up. I'll watch out for the slides. So, shall we get started with the front matter?
Yep.
Okay. So welcome to ADD, session 2 at IETF 110. We have a longer block today, so we're going to try to find a natural place, probably at about the 1 hour mark, to take a 5-minute break for everybody to grab a coffee or do whatever. Be aware, note well applies. This is an official IETF session, so please familiarize yourself with the provisions of it if you are not already aware. I'm Glenn Dean. I'm your co-chair for ADD, and Mr. David Lawrence is my co-chair. Say hello, David.
Hello.
So this is the agenda for today. We've done note well. We've done subscriber selection, agenda bash. We'll have open microphone at the end, so I think pretty much if there's topics people want to bring up, that's the opportunity right there. This is hello from the chairs. Mr. Vink, our new incoming AD, Barry Oliva, has handed off to Eric Vink the responsibilities as the AD for the AD working group. Eric, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, thank you, Glenn. Simply want to say hello to this working group, which is quite close to another one I had before, which is Deprive. So I was following it for far away. So happy to continue working with Glenn and Dave on this one, and of course all the working group.
Thank you, Eric. So that brings us to where we left off on Monday, and so on Tuesday.
And if you don't mind, again, obviously. So simply want to thank Barry.
You're breaking up, Eric.
For
Say again,
working.
Yes, of course. We absolutely do want to thank Barry, because Barry's done a wonderful job. We've been in business now for I think about a year, and Barry was instrumental in getting us over the goalpost of getting formed as a working group, and he's been a wonderful AD to work with. So thank you very much, Barry, for the great work. And just give me a second here, Dave. If you want to fill the air gap while I download these new slides and present them.
Sure. I was going to break out into tune, but I can't imagine that would have gone over so well. Yeah, I don't actually. Aside from singing show tunes, I'm a little short on filling up airtime. So.
Well, do you lean towards what do you have a particular, like, are you like a Porgy and Bess kind of guy, or do you lean towards?
No, I can actually say I was in quite a few musicals throughout my middle school and high school career. Music Man, Fiddler on the Roof, all that era, the great grand era of musicals. Oklahoma, Mame.
I did not know that. That is a fascinating fact.
Well, I can break out into show tunes, but it looks like Med maybe is ready to talk. So if you've got those slides ready to go,
are they displayed?
Yeah.
All right. Which slide would you like me to go to?
Yeah, you can go to the next one, please. Yeah, so thank you, Dean, and I'm sorry for this delay to start the session. So we just right after the first session we had last time, we tried to capitalize on the comment that we received so far, and the various comments we received during the session, and also some of the consideration we have already on the draft. And we would like to make a proposal so that we can make some progress for the specification. Of course, this proposal does not mean that all will be frozen, but at least we will have something we would like at the end of the meeting to have, I would say, a base so that we can adjust on the future, but at least some of the key feature can be covered. So. The main proposal will be structured as shown in this slide. So the first key consideration that we heard, I would say, at least for the last meeting, is that if DNSSEC is supported by the client and we have the records that are signed at the server side, So the information that will be, I would say, sufficient so for the client to discover the resolvers will be the ADN itself and a list of IP addresses. And then once this information is supplied to the client can use the SVCB queries to resolve the I would say the domain name, and this information will be sent to the IP address that is provided in this information. But as we all know that DNSSEC is not that supported by some of the clients, and we may also have I would say the zone which is not signed. So we have the next step is that if DNSSEC is not supported, so what are the key information that will be required by the client so that it can securely retrieve the information that will be needed for the process. So in addition to the EDN, the name information that is already present in the previous step, and also the list of IP addresses, we will need an alternate port number because we, for instance, for DNS over TLS or even for QUIC, we may not have the same port number used for I would say binding the service. And in addition to that, we will also need to convey in the DHCP option the information about the type of the encrypted DNS which is supported by the server. This one is needed in order to avoid having the problem to go through all the variant of the encrypted DNS services that are supported by the client. So all this for information can be at least required to be returned in the DHCP option. And then once we have this information, the client, if it supports DNS over TLS, or if it supports also DNS over QUIC, and in addition to that, it supports also the DNS over HTTPS. In that case, the client will establish a secure connection using the information that is provided in this previous step, so that to retrieve the list of the URI templates from the server. But if the client is only supporting the UH, in that case, the client must request a list of URI templates from the DHCP server. This is important to avoid having the external attacks against the SVCP carriers, and also if in case the request, the SVCP requests get blocked somewhere. So this is basically, I would say, the overall sketch of the proposal that we would like to propose for the working group. Of course, we may consider some simplifications, and as shown in the next slide.
Well, let's sit here for a second. We've got some confusion going on in chat and people that want to jump in with a couple of questions. So, Tommy Pauly, please first.
All right. Yeah, thank you for updating proposals. I like the first half. I'm not. It sounds like this is kind of a hybrid in which we have the stuff we were talking about on Tuesday and the stuff that was existing. And that's being conditional on DNSSEC. Can you explain a bit more why? I don't recall why DNSSEC should matter here, really, because if we have the name, then we can do a secure upgrade. The only attack that I can think of is that someone could do a denial of service, but that already is possible. Someone could just block your communication.
Yeah, I think this point particularly, Tommy, was discussed on the mailing list, and the clarification was already given there, is that you, for instance, you can, if DNSSEC is not supported, then someone can return to you, I would say, some queries, and then you can directly to another fake server, which is claiming to, I would say, own the name and so on. So,
but I guess in that case, so if I have the name from DHCP, and if I'm on a network where I'm trusting DHCP more than DNS because I have DHCP guard or something like that, then unless this name that the network is giving out is fundamentally compromised, so let's say it's Cloudflare DNS or it's your Xfinity DNS or something, if rogue DNS servers have valid certificates for that, then people are going to have a bad time connecting to that DNS server in general. But assuming that is valid and people are, when they're using the SVCB record results, they are using the name.
Hey, Tommy, can I take that question? Yeah. Hello. Yeah, Tommy, you're right that if DHCP gives you an ADN, TLS certificate validation would happen, and there is no possibility of an attack. But the attack that we discussed in the last minute of yesterday's meeting was a scenario where the DNS response is modified in a way to show that there is a DOH, DOT, or DOQ server, but the parameters are set in a way that the client doesn't connect to it. It's basically a spoofing attack, but it says the servers are available and the client tries to connect to that. Maybe it picks some parameters which the client doesn't support, or it picks any other, let's say it talks about some protocol that the client does not support, and it becomes a denial of service. The denial of service is not
see that.
because
I think that reduces
not
down
because-
to the exact same denial of service, right? Because there are many ways to denial of service. You can block
yeah,
the DNS record, you can modify it to be incorrect, or more easily, and what you are still vulnerable to, no matter what you put in DHCP, someone can just block your communication
sure.
to that server.
So there are multiple types of denial of service. We are just talking about an attack of denial of service where you get tampered responses and the client thinks the server is available, it's supporting DOH, but it's still not able to connect, and it just queues up and falls back to DO53. But in case if there is a denial of service where somebody is blocking it, the client would be sure that, hey, there is an attacker which is blocking it. But in this case, the client would be thinking, hey, maybe it's the server is upgraded, it's using some latest version that I don't have, and I'm falling back. So there's a difference between the two attacks that you can see that in one case the client has no knowledge why it was blocked from accessing that server. In the other case,
as a client, if I received this scenario that you're describing, in which I received indication that I support encrypted DNS with a name, I looked up the record and I failed to connect, I would treat that as an attack, and I think we would need to let the user know. I don't think there's any reason to have a client assume that, oh, they just have an old version. I think that should look like an attack, and we should mandate that. Anyway, I'll let the others in the queue.
okay.
Thank you, Tommy. Ecker, please.
So I think maybe let's just take a step back here, and make sure we all agree on the basic assumptions. The first basic assumption is whatever stuff you got in this, in this message is authentic, correct? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And that whatever you get over DNS is not authentic unless it is authenticated via either DNSSEC or TLS, correct?
Right.
Okay, good. And the server has no way of knowing the client's capabilities, but the server knows its own, correct? So when you say if DNSSEC is supported by the client, or DNSSEC is not supported by the client, I don't understand what that means.
Yeah, this is the behavior from the client standpoint.
I understand, but my point is the server has to provide to the client something it can accept. And
yeah, this is something that we will discuss on the next slide to see how, because as a function of the capabilities of the client, this will trigger, I would say, some of the information that will be requested by the client itself to the server, and also how it will handle some of the information it will receive from the server. The server does not need to be aware of the capabilities of the client itself.
Right. What I'm saying is, rather than having two versions, have one. Have the one that works when the client does not support DNSSEC.
Yeah.
So, I don't understand. I don't understand why we're making the switch statement here. As I understand this point, the security properties. Do you believe the security properties of these two arms of the slide, DNSSEC is supported by the client or DNSSEC is not supported by the client, are the same?
Yes.
Then I don't. Yes, and I don't understand why we need to have both arms. Let's just have the second arm.
So Eric, to answer that, right? I mean, there was, yeah. So I think if you go where the DNSSEC is not supported, then DNSSEC is supported just becomes a sub case. But we just wanted to cover why the difference is required in case if DNSSEC is not required. We can just go with this case, but it was just to illustrate the purpose why the SVCB query was not sufficient and you had to rely on something else because of clients which were not doing that. But the proposal could be just sticking to the later one without
Sure.
going into
Now, this brings me to a final point, which is what we are now doing is adding like tiny little pieces of SVCB into this message to get to the point where we're satisfied. And
Correct.
bringing back to my point yesterday, let us add all of SVCB here. And they really did no analysis whatsoever to determine what pieces of SVCB we have to manage. And we'll not have to do the thing we want to do in the next slide, which is required dot. And all we'll have to do is import SVCB. So instead of trying to do like a bunch of, like when we first agreed to accept this work, I said, and I believe a number of others said, let us not create a situation where we have a disjoint set of information or overlapping set of information, which is in this record and which is SVCB. Your original proposal was designed to have exactly one thing, which was the ADN. So it was like easy to analyze. But now what you're doing is you're creating a whole pile of new stuff, which we have to analyze. I mean, much easier simply to say SVCB, and then we don't have to think of the problem at all.
Yes, thank you, Ecker. I do.
Sorry. I want to say one more thing. And if the problem is for some reason it's too big, put a digest of SVCB. Now I'm done.
Okay, excellent, Eric, and Tiru and Med. I hope you will very much take those comments into consideration. And now, Ralph Weber, please.
Yeah, I think the initial draft was very simple in the way that it had kind of the IP address and then a bitmap, and then you connect it and be done. And I agree that DHCP should be like that. You get the information and you can, with that information, make a connection to a DNS server. What we are now doing is kind of like creating a circular dependency. And I agree that, I mean, if we want to go down the SVCP record, just stick the record in the DHCP packet and be done. I mean, why are these additional steps needed? That's something I don't understand. Thanks.
Thank you, Ralph. Ben Schwartz, please.
So to me, the core sticky question here that we need to address is what happens if you are a DOE-only client and your network hands you a resolver that says this resolver supports encrypted DNS, and you chase the information about that resolver and find that it only does DNS over TLS, or any other combination of protocols. You're a DOT-only client, and your network hands you an encrypted resolver that appears to only support DOH. There are various options there. The obvious options are to fail open or fail closed, and they're both bad. They both create some either serious security or operational challenges. Note that we're talking about DHCP. There's no negotiation here between the client and the DHCP server, really. The DHCP server is just informing the client. So I think that, to me, is the core thing that we want to resolve here.
Thank you, Ben. Ecker.
Ben.
I think there's perhaps two. I think I agree with Ben that thanks for sharpening that so much. I'll sharpen it out a tiny bit more, which is that there are two questions. One question is, do you have that information authentically? And the other question is, do you have that information authentically? And the attack you propose on the mailing list involves having the information non-authentically. But if you have the information authentically, I think I actually don't agree with Tommy, which is if I join a network and I only speak DO, and the network says, well, I only have DOC. And it's like, oh, well, that was kind of sad, but I mean, and I just go ahead. But I mean, the point of this mechanism is, the point of this mechanism, after all, is to allow you to discover that networks do have upgraded security and take advantage of that. And so, if we're willing to have the assumption that the client would actually refuse to connect an ARM secure resolver, actually the problem would be much, much simpler, right? Because then you wouldn't have to trust much of this information at all. So I think that I think my understanding of this assumption is the client wants to, and I don't want to say opportunistic because that's not quite right, but the client wants to discover if the network supports a secure resolver and then use it, but also not use it if it does not have one. So I think if the information is authentic, the answer is actually, I'm not sure if you want to call it fail open, but it should continue with DO53.
Thank you, Ecker. Ben is back, please.
So I am perfectly okay with that. I just want to be clear about what the result of that is. The result of that in this design is that is essentially what Mohammed has put on the slide, which is that at a minimum you need you need the DHCP server to enumerate for you the set of protocols supported by the server. So the client cannot insecurely discover that set of protocols using only the ADN.
I concur.
And I agree with Ecker that if you're going to include that kind of information, then you should probably ship the whole configuration.
Thank you, Ben. Jim Reed, please.
I'm getting a bit confused by this discussion because I think we're diving too much in detail when things like the threat model is really not clear and fully understood. I mean, what are the risks here about using DNSSEC? Where are the requirements? Maybe we need to step back a little bit even further from what Eka had mentioned a few minutes ago. What is it this particular proposal is trying to solve from a threat perspective?
Thank you, Jim. Glenn, did you have something you were going to say?
Yeah, so not wearing a hat here. I just wanted to point out that the device that this DHCP server we're talking about running on will be an older legacy CP device in most cases. So it just strikes me as we should, I think, always keep in mind that we need to keep that portion of the thing simple. And getting these things upgraded is going to be very difficult. It has always proven to be very difficult. So keeping what behavior we expect from the DHCP server at a very simple level, I think is the path to success here, not adding a lot of complexity onto it.
Thank you, Glenn. Tiru, please.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the proposal of putting in the entire SVCP DNS response in the DHCP option, but what we realized was when we started looking into the DHCP options, the way the DHCP options were supposed to be designed, it's supposed to be really simple. And if you're supposed to put the entire SVCP record, it seems to be deviating from the guidelines that were set with regard to DHCP option set. And this needs to be definitely discussed in a much larger form, probably in other working group where DHCP options are being defined. But if SVCP option were put, we don't have to do all of this, and it's very straightforward. But the concern why we put all of this in a format that would be acceptable by the DHCP working group was to keep it as simple as possible. And if SVCP record is the way to go, and if this working group and the DHC working group has no issues, I think that's the easiest way to get this done.
Thank you, Tiru. Tommy Pauly back.
Yeah, I'd like to maybe kind of call on Ecker to clarify the thing that he said last time and what he has in chat around using the hash. So would that essentially just be a hash of this so that we would query the SVCP records, but we would be able to detect if someone is messing with them? So it's really just like a way to validate that, to validate I'm not under attack. That sounds like an interesting direction for this.
Yeah, that sounds like a really simple way of solving it, and we could just give the ADN plus IP addresses plus the hash. So that's
right. And if you know the hash, then you can validate that you have the correct set of responses, and then that's the limit that you'll ever have of all the information you ever have to put in DHCP or any other protocol.
Right.
Oh, we cannot hear you, Ecker.
Yeah, Ecker is.
Oh, jeez. It doesn't say
it's
your.
just a simple SHA-2 hash, right? That you're referring to, Polly, right? Nothing to do with any secrets or anything like that. It's just a simple SHA hash.
I assume so. I'm trying to. Anyway, once Ecker can speak. Well, yeah.
Okay.
I like that direction. We want to go.
For the moment, while Ecker hopefully gets that sorted out, could Ben please comment?
Hi. So I wanted to first say, in terms of simplicity, I think okay. In terms of management, I do not think shipping a hash of the record or record set is really an option here. These things are dynamic, so if the client does a lookup, there is no particular guarantee that it gets the exact record set that was previously seen by the DHCP server. So you could easily get mismatches that are not due to any kind of attack, and that would result in the client essentially going offline. I do not think that shipping these records creates a lot of operational complexity or implementation complexity, because they are opaque to the DHCP server. The DHCP server just basically needs the domain name, and it can fetch this record. Although there's some security questions about the bootstrap process there, but it doesn't need to look inside the record. It just needs to plop the record into this DHCP option. If the concern is really about record size, I also think that we don't need to worry too much about that. Service B is tightly optimized for size because DNS records are also under considerable size pressure, so it's a very efficient encoding. So I floated a suggestion on the mailing list to ship entire DNS responses, essentially, with multiple records in the standard full DNS wire format. One reason that I think that's relevant is that we need to talk about TTLs here. DHCP leases are typically measured in hours to days, but DNS records can turn over much faster, especially address records that are used for load balancing. So if an entire large subnet, it could thousands of devices or even more, could be served by a single DHCP server that's handing everybody a fixed set of IP addresses for a DNS server that is which they are then holding onto for days at a time. That's going to interfere with the ability of typical CDN style load balancing, which is allowed with Service B. So I think TTLs are valuable here, although if necessary, we can say that you should shorten your DHCP lease to compensate. That's not, I suspect some people wouldn't be so happy with that. But if we can omit the TTLs, then we can also talk about an even more compressed representation where you just ship the Service B contents, essentially resolved Service B. And that's really very compact. It should be fine.
Okay, thank you, Ben. I'll observe. I plan on taking just Kirsty and Ecker for comments. Elliot, if it can be really quick, I suppose you have snuck in under the wire. We spent a long time on this slide, then. We still have quite a few things to get to in the session. So I think there's been a lot of great discussion here, and it's certainly now kind of well encapsulated to bring to the list to hammer out the details. So Kirsty, please.
Thank you. I'll be quick so Elliot can speak. I'd just like to go back to a point that I don't think was really addressed very well, which is in order to know kind of what security things we should be using here, we need a clear threat model and to know what you're trying to protect from who and what the assumed capabilities are of your various attackers. So I'd really like to have a lot more discussion on what problem this is solving and what you're assuming of your attackers. Thanks.
Thank you, Kirsty. Ecker, glad to have you back.
Yes, I was cleverly trying to make a contribution to SAG. Anyway, I mean, I basically agree with what Ben was saying. there's some version of the world where the hash like adds value, but like it's like where you can't like fit things in the record, or because like for some reason people don't think that like any structure on the record is good, which I don't understand why that would be. I think putting it inlining it is obviously better if you can.
Thank you, Ecker. Elliot, please.
Sorry, good afternoon and good morning. I'm just typing as fast as I can. Just one quick comment about what Ben said, or a refinement rather. DHCP TTLs are all over the map. In enterprises, in homes and elsewhere, they range from 5 minutes to hours. I don't think anybody uses longer than hours these days, except in specialized cases. So far as I know, at least it's not generally considered best practice at that point, unless you have a stability issue within the environment. What I think, Ben, is where I would find agreement with Ben is that if you have to match the DNS TTL to a DHCP lifetime or an RA lifetime, one of the important things to think about then is who owns each of those values in terms of how they're set. And that should receive a little bit further consideration. And thanks for the time.
Thank you, Elliot. Glenn and Med, on to the next slide, please.
Thank you. So thank you all for sharing this comment. We will, yeah. So in the next slide, so this is reflecting what we call the simplified proposal. This is based on some of the inputs from Ben. So he's basically proposing that to consider the to make the support of DOT, I would say mandatory. But for this one, we have an issue, as we can see in the next slide, please. Is that this is basically updating the existing RFCs, and it's really weird to require to model some capabilities on the tank that we are trying to discover, and we think that this is not an option for us, and also this is beyond the working group charter. So any comment on that part?
Yeah, I think Ecker has a direct comment right on that part.
Okay, I don't really understand why we're just moving forward with the slides as if we didn't have a long discussion about how this direction was wrong.
Yeah, I want just to make sure that the option that was proposed by Ben Atlet for making mandatory, I would say the support of DOT is something that that is formally excluded by the working group, and that's it.
Okay, but we certainly have to reach that question because like we just like discussed an entirely different direction, which doesn't require it.
Med and Gary, would you like to address that?
Yeah. I mean, if you're taking the direction of putting the SVCP parameters in the DHCP, I think rest of the slides are basically discussing if you have to mandate DOT based on what we were discussing in the mailing list yesterday, but they're no longer relevant for the discussion. So I think if there's consensus to pick that approach, we can update the draft and post the revision. If we see no more objections to that.
So let me jump in here. I think the step here forward is take this to the list. Whatever consensus you think you've sort of heard here to, or Med, post it to the list, let the list discuss it. Let's get to the point where everybody's sort of understanding what the proposal is at this current state after this discussion just took place. And then we can all sort of evaluate where we're all at, okay? I think that's the next step forward from this discussion. We're good? Okay.
Yeah.
Do we need any more slides from this deck, or can we move on to the next?
There's only, I think that's where with the there's only one about the customization of the templates, but I think that will be covered if we just include the default set if the DHCP option. So I think we are done for this one.
Okay, thank you. All right then. So we're going to go on to the next discussion point in the agenda, which is DNS server information with assertion token. Who's speaking to this one? Jiru?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we have done several revisions to the draft, and we have received several comments from the working group. And in the last working group session, we had presented the requirements for the resolver publishing its self description, and we have updated the draft to align with the strict requirements. Um, we would like to discuss the next steps for this draft, and we have a couple of issues that we wanted to discuss and see how we would want to make progress. Next slide, please. Uh, this draft was trying to publish the resolver information. It had various attributes. I mean, we had received several comments from the working group, and the current list that you see is the one that we had published yesterday, which is the I would say the minimum set of requirements that there was consensus on that should be supported, and we stripped off all the other attributes. So it's very clear, as you see, it's just talking about the DNS server capabilities, whether it's doing QNAM minimization. It's returning all the error codes, possible error codes that the server would return. So for example, a client would know that, hey, with the error codes like blocked, filtered, and censored, which are already defined in RFC 8914, it would know whether the server is performing filtering. Client auth is for basically identifying if the server can do client authentication. We had changed the way the resolver information would be provided, and based on the comments that we received from Tommy, it's changed to a simple generic unstructured resolver information, which would provide probably the APIs being used by the DOH server, what kind of templates it supports, any contact information in case if the server is not reachable or it's very slow. So it's mostly for troubleshooting and other purposes. The other one that we had discussed in the last interim was to display an human-friendly description of the resolver identity for the end user. So the resolver information has been stripped off to this bare minimum set of information. Next slide, please. So there's one question, right? How do you convey the resolver information? So the draft has been always relying on resinfo resource record type for till 05 version, but then we saw that that draft was, even though it was adapted in DNS of working group, it got expired, and we don't see any progress happening on that. Then we were thinking of looking into SVCP resource record types, but that doesn't suit like the right resource record type, but because it's supposed to just give the alternate equivalent services point to them. And that's a discussion we're having with Ben. And now the issue that we have now is, hey, do you want to revive that resinfo draft, or we can just add a very similar resource record type within this draft, which just supposed to publish the information in JSON format, and we make progress of it. So that's the one issue that we wanted to bring to the attention of the working group and get feedback on that.
Would anybody like to comment on this issue? Ben Schwartz, please.
Hey, so my troll suggestion is to put this in resinfo as a TXT record on resinfo.bind in the chaos class. Because that's what this is, right? This is like version.bind. This is server debugging info that is designed to be more or less human readable. Just, you know, so we have a pattern for that, but I assume everybody will hate that. So leaving that aside, I do support I do support using the resinfo RR type or a TXT record on a well-known name.
Thank you, Ben. Well, I'm not sure thank you is the right response to that. No one else, so let's move on to the next slide, please.
Yeah, thanks for that. The other issue was the resolver assistant information. I mean, we had quite discussed why do you need that and what are the advantages. It's basically talking about cryptographic assertions that would be provided along with the resolver information for the client to validate whether it's this resolver is actually hosted by an legitimate organization. If some legitimate organization had done any audit on this DNS server for it to know that, hey, it's not being hosted by an attacker. So So Ben had suggested that to keep this draft simple and keep this resolver assistant token separate so that we can discuss the need for it and what kind of threats it addresses and what sort of scenarios it is required, and whether there are other mechanisms where we can do this out of band without having to embed it within the within a JWT, right? So that's a question again back to the working group. If the working group wants this draft to just specifically stick to the resolver information that we just saw and take this out of the draft and discuss it and probably debate if this is something that we want to solve, or is this the right way to solve it, and are there any better ways of doing it?
Elliot, please.
Yeah, hi, Kira. Just a stupid little thing, but can you please, everybody's going to get confused with RAT because of RATs and remote attestation, and it's really, these areas are really close. Just pick something else. Sorry to take the working group's time on this, but you know, it's hard enough to read this stuff without getting lost in acronyms.
It is no need for apology.
Yeah, I realized after putting that name that it resembles what's happening in RAT's working group. We'll figure out some other name. Yeah, we'll change that. Elliot, thanks for that.
Please.
But it resembles the for the working group interest, it resembles the background check that we have in the RATS architecture. So it's very close to what is being discussed in the RATS working group.
So my suggestion here is, I think in order to us track this and manage it, I think a separate draft would be the right path here. If the group makes a decision, we can always fold it back in and into the main work. But I think a separate draft would allow us to track and discuss it more effectively. So,
sure.
For what it's worth, from the chair view.
Yeah, I don't see any issue with that. So yeah, I mean that probably makes the resolver information to progress much faster. So why not?
It also makes it easier if ultimately we need to link to some other external group that wants to also weigh in on it. So okay. Moving on.
I think that's about it. I think probably it's too early call for working group production based on this, because we have work to do, and we'll publish a revised draft, split this draft into two, and then we'll take it to the list. So yeah, thanks for all the comments, and looking forward for further comments after we post the revised drafts.
Okay, thank you. So we're at 4:46 here, 46 minutes, 14 minutes to the hour. Do we want to take a short break now, since it's a natural sort of place, or do we want to trudge on with the next draft?
As your co-chair, I think let's move on to the next and then take the break.
Awesome. Okay. Well, the next one, who's speaking to this one?
Yeah, I will speak. I'll speak to this one as well. So we just published this draft a few weeks back, and there was tremendous response from the working group. Thanks for that. Next slide, please. Yeah, we'll just, I'm not going to go into too many details with the proposed mechanism. We'll just talk about the goal, scope, and the issues so that we can discuss more on the issues and next steps. Next slide. This is again what we had presented as one of the emerging requirements in the interim working group. So I'll just reiterate that without taking too much time. That's to discover local names. This is very similar to what was done in the IPsec.me working group, where the VPN client would discover the internal domains. And the other one was to discover if the network allows a split DNS configuration. Next slide. Yeah, the scope is pretty limited to networks where the client can authenticate the identity of a network. So it has some pre-existing relationship. This draft is, the scope of this draft currently is restricted to BOD devices joining an enterprise network without an MDM and configuration profile, because if they have that, then those secure mechanisms, MDM can be used to provision the domain with, provision the device with, the internal domains or the configuration profile could be used to solve that problem. And in this case, the user trusts the network to override the DNS setting, similar to the way if you're using any VPN today, you can disable VPN, let's say in my enterprise network or my home network. Next slide, please. So what we are doing to solve the problem, so we pick PVDs, provisioning domains. For solving the problem, provisioning domains is supposed to provide the DNS resolver information. So it also gives you an option of web PVDs where the client would be provided the well-known URI of the HTTPS server, which would have the additional information. And that is where we are providing the internal domains and to let the client know whether they're private only or they're public, but because you're attached to the network, you get to see a different version of the content. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is a very simple format example that we picked. The first three are already defined in the PVD, web PVD, RFC. So this draft is just talking about the domain names and to say whether they are really internal or they are not internal, but you get to see a different view of the content because you're attached to that specific network. Next slide. Yeah, this specific issue had a lot of discussion in the working group that how does the client know that the network is not lying, right? I mean, it needs to know that the network doesn't want to invade on your privacy and look into the DNS request responses to see what the client is doing. So what would be the best way for the client to know that the server is not lying? So this was a suggestion that came from Ben. I have already posted a revised draft to say that the easiest way for it to do is if it has a pre-configured resolver, then just do NSEC3. NSEC3 is the most recommended way of getting an authenticated response to say that the domains doesn't exist. And if indeed the response is NSEC3, then it proves that the domains don't exist and the network is not lying to you. The draft also talks about a scenario where let's imagine if the public resolver is not reachable or the client has not pre-configured with a public resolver, then probably one possible way that we saw the IKE split DNS draft was talking about is to pre-configure top well-known domains and TLDs, which needs to be constantly updated to see if the server is lying. It's not a foolproof technique, but it can be possibly used by an implementation in case if the resolver is not available, or it could just hard fail and decide that, hey, since somebody's blocking that and I can't validate that, I will just hard fail and not do anything. So the draft is leaving those options open so that the working group can give us more feedback. But we have listed both the ones as possible mechanisms so that we can have more discussion and to see what we would want to propose to make progress on this.
So
Any
question on
questions
that
on
then. Yeah, I have one question. So are you considering the two scenarios where, or actually I see three scenarios here. One is the domain truly does not exist in the global DNS, and so of course that will be testable and fail. But you could have a situation where somebody publishes a non-signed version of that domain in order to try to hack the private hosted domain network. And so are you putting a lot of dependency then on the environment to be able to detect that and do a validation? That's case number two. Case number three is the owner of that domain has both an internal and external versions of it, but those two different versions are not aligned in their record sets.
Yeah, Glenn, so to answer that question, right, I mean, we have another issue where we talk about domains which are public and you have a different view. So that's a different topic and that will be covered in a separate way that Ben had suggested and we had updated the draft. So that is dealt with a different technique. So there are actually 2 and 3 techniques there. We're just talking about 2 techniques here for, this is only for private domains. We have another technique for public domains. Maybe we'll go over that so that we can take more comments so that it would give a perspective of all the techniques that are discussed in the draft.
Okay, is that the next slide?
Yeah, it's in the next slide. Yes. Yeah, this is something that we had discussed in length and breadth during the working group's mailing list. So one technique that was proposed, which was very straightforward, was what happens in case if you have a different version of the public domain in the attached network. So in that case, the client needs to know that the network is in fact claiming authority and it is indeed the owner of that zone, right? So the technique that we have updated the draft is to say that the client just does an NS query lookup to get the name servers to see that if the name servers match the ADN of the discovered network provided resolver, then it pretty much show that, hey, the network is actually is claiming authority of the domain, and the NS response record is proving that. And then what the client can do is authenticate the network provided resolver as usual, using the mechanisms that we had discussed in DNR and DDR drafts, and resolve those domains in the PVD. So those are the three mechanisms that we have in the draft, and would like to get more feedback on this.
And okay, Ben, please.
Hi. So thanks a lot for making all these changes. I really, at a technical level, I really like this version of the draft. I think it maintains, it does something new. I think it achieves a version of split DNS that maintains a new interesting security invariant. I really appreciate that. The thing that I'm missing here is, and that I think we should ask for here, is whether there's essentially client-side implementer interest. You know, is there anybody who implements a client whose behavior would actually be affected by this, that is interested in supporting it? Because most clients, the simple clients don't need this. A simple client will simply use either its own resolver if it wants to use its own resolver, or it will use the resolver provided over DNR, in which case there's no need for this, because that resolver can simply provide the answers that we're talking about. So the case where this matters is where the client wants to put itself into a configuration where it's using multiple resolvers. And if there are clients that are interested in implementing that behavior, then I think this is a good start on how to do that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. Tommy Pauli, please.
Yeah, speaking as a client implementer, I am interested in solving this overall problem. I agree that for the default status quo cases, people are either using the default network resolver, or they're using something that they've hard-coded to override that. But on the client, I would like to move to scenarios where we can have a more private and stance by default for certain categories of traffic that doesn't necessarily use anything that the network provides, unless we can prove that the network is authoritative for something. And essentially, the model that you have, if you don't have a secure way to validate that a network does have access to some private domain, is that you try over some other mechanism, you realize it doesn't exist there, and then you fall back to going locally, which works but is inefficient. So this would be or something solving this area, not just for DNS, but saying that this network has kind of special authority over a given domain, would be a useful thing on our client.
Thanks, Tommy.
Thank you. Before we move on, the feedback that I'm hearing is that Tiru is on the right track with all of this. If somebody has pushback on that, now would be the time to jump in and let us know. Three, two, one. Next, please.
Yeah. I think we have addressed so far all the comments that we have received, and we would like more feedback. And maybe after that, we can, if I've seen interest from the working group, so we'll request for working group adoption of the draft.
Thank you, Tiru. Glenn, back to you.
Well, it seems like we've reached a happy place where a 5-minute break might be in order. So everybody, that would be 3 minutes after the hour. So come on back. Let's give you, if I give you to 5 minutes after the hour. So
Yeah, let's round it right to 5 after the hour. So.
Okay, we're on break to 5 minutes after the hour.
If I were a rich man, yugga digga 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 dum, all day long I'd biddy biddy bum. If I were a wealthy man. That's the end of your break there. So back to Glenn.
And we'll be testing the YouTube copyright filters with that performance. All right, moving on. The next one is, oh, hang on here. Oh, wow, my gosh. Okay, back to the agenda. So we are now moving to the open microphone section of the show. And for those who do not have comments for the microphone, I offer you this fun, happy cat to stare at for the next few minutes while we have a barrage of conversations. So this is open mic. You can talk about any topic around ADD. This is, usually this crowd is not very shy. So I imagine we're going to have some good conversations.
Andrew Campling, please.
Somebody has to be first. I mean, I think it's really encouraging to see that we're potentially getting to the point where we've got solutions around both split DNS and sort of the private IP address DNS forwarder use cases. Because if we're going to get to solve the 85% problem that Eric Orth highlighted via one of his colleagues at the virtual interim, it's incredibly important we've got solutions for both of those. So it feels like we're on the cusp of making good progress in both those areas, which is encouraging. I don't know what others think on that.
Andrew. I'll observe that we had quite a lot of discussion on that very first slide of the session, that if we want to revisit that now, that would also be a very reasonable use of time. Tiru, please.
I saw the proposal from the issue that Ben had raised for the TDR draft with regard to using the specially assigned domain name and how it's possible to do both authenticated discovery and opportunistic discovery for cases where there is a legacy router whose firmware cannot be updated, cases where probably its firmware can be updated, but just to update the DHCP server configuration, and the cases where a scenario where the router is doing DNS filtering. In that case, what would be the fallback mechanism? So I think that that changes that he had proposed should address the cases of all the legacy router scenarios. So I think having more discussion on that and making progress, and probably either adding that to the DDR draft or a separate draft would make a quick progress on that, because that's look like a straightforward proposal to me.
Thank you, Tiru. I have to say that Glenn and I did not anticipate that an open mic session at ADD would be so quiet.
So let me bring up one point that I know there's been some side conversations going on about based upon comments from session number 1, and that is around the RSC 1918 CP devices, places using CGNAT, stuff like that, and the ability for some of the proposed approaches to work and support that environment. So this is primarily, it seems like a lot of European ISPs have their CPs defined in this way. It's present in mobile devices, some mobile setups. I've been told that some of the Asian ISP networks also have this situation. Do people want to sort of talk about that and bring it up?
Tira, please.
Yeah. I can talk from my company's perspective what we do, right? I mean, we offer both enterprise and consumer security services, network services, and one of the one that we offer for consumer network security is offering network security services on home routers. So we deploy our network security services on both managed and unmanaged devices, and because we are running a network security service there, these routers are quite easily upgradable because we have to keep updating the stack to address new vulnerabilities, getting new signatures so that we can handle new threats. So that's the reason one of the interest is for us to host a DOT forwarder on the home router so that we can still enforce security policies. Either it could be anomaly detection, or it could be filtering any malicious domains, or enforcing mud policies is of great interest to that, and we just shipped our product doing that. So that's the reason I see that we see both the scenarios where there are routers which are upgradable, but we also see some combination from ISPs where there are legacy routers and whose firmware cannot be updated, and we don't give any security services other than relying on the ISP to do some security protection in that case, which is probably at a home network level and not at a device specific level, especially for IoT devices.
Thank you, Kiri. Jim Reed, please.
Thanks, David. I agree with what Glenn was saying, that the case and the use cases around things to do with RFC 1980 nets and CGNAT is something this working group can look at. I'm not sure we can do much of a discussion about it here and now, because I think the first thing we'll need to do, well, one of the things we're going to have to do is have a draft that talks to these particular concerns and to try and crystallize some of the major issues around it. I think another thing that needs to be done in that area is more engagement and involvement from the operators of those kind of networks, also maybe some enterprise networks as well. Because I think if we try to sort of second guess what's going on there, I mean, some of us will have some insights into this, but if we try to second guess how things are done in those settings, the chances are we'll make mistakes, and that would not be good. So yeah, I think this is a work item for further considerations at some point for the working group. I'm not sure we can do much of a discussion right now in this open mic session. Something else, just changing the subject slightly, I'll just mention it while I'm here, is I'm certainly suffering from a bit of confusion about the number of documents I've got and where their status is just now and what needs to be done to progress them. And maybe I'll delegate this upward to our esteemed working group chairs, and maybe they could post a summary to the list. I mean, it'd be a good idea to know as to what we think, when documents might be in a position to be ready to be considered, say, for working group adoption, or to be progressing, maybe say for discussion at the next meeting. That I think would be very helpful, particularly because the discussion we've just had, and I'm a little bit confused about the status of some of the drafts. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim.
Neil Cook, please.
Regarding the 1918 private address issue, I think it was interesting. Ben, we talked about this on Tuesday. Ben mentioned that he had a PR and he's moved that into the DDR repo. I'm very supportive of that. I'd really be interested to see if the authors can incorporate that or something like that in the next version of the draft, because I think that really addresses the issues around private IP addresses and legacy CPEs, which, as we said, are not currently in the draft.
Thank you, Neil. Tommy Pauly.
Hello. Yeah, just to respond to that, I totally agree that addressing that case is very important, and I think we do want to merge something in around that. Personally, I think if you look at the discussion there, I think I have a bit of concern around mandating a 5-minute retry timer on all clients. So I think the particular mechanism needs more discussion and input from the group. So I would ask that people do look at that proposal and try to think about different ways we can solve that problem.
Thank you, Tommy.
So from the chairs here, Ben, I see you're up next in the queue. Since you were, I was going to make a suggestion that since you are the one that submitted the pull request, and in the fact that we do want to have primary discussion go on the list and not just over in the world of GitHub, would it be possible for you to maybe post to the list a pointer to that PR and some pros around it?
So I did yesterday, I believe, send a link to the list and sent maybe a one-sentence summary. I can certainly expand on that a little more. As Tommy pointed out, there's probably the most, well, there's a few different aspects of this proposal that aren't entirely trivial, and one of them is this question of what does it mean to get an authentication anchor from an untrusted source? So you get a reference identity, the name of a resolver, something you can validate, but you get it from a DNS server operating on a private IP address. And so you have no particular security mechanism there, except that whoever is operating that DNS server, if you don't upgrade to encrypted DNS, will still see all of your queries. And so then there's this question of what does it mean to do that upgrade securely? And I think the answer is the upgrade is secure if you haven't converted a transient attacker into a persistent attacker. If there is a persistent attacker, you're hosed either way. You can accomplish nothing. So we don't have to worry about it. You can't make it any worse. If there's a transient attacker, then you have to be careful not to give them permanent access when maybe they would have disappeared after a few minutes. And then you would have been back in a secure state. So I just typed in this arbitrary, originally requirement, now downgraded to should level recommendation, that says you should just repeat this process every 5 minutes. So if there's an attacker, they can only, who can briefly redirect you to an encrypted server, that will only last for 5 minutes, and then you're going to go check again. And if the attacker has gone away, you'll flip to the correct configuration. That is certainly not the only heuristic that we can imagine for this, and I would definitely appreciate more input on how to phrase that requirement and what sort of behaviors we should recommend.
Thank you, Ben. Tiru, please.
To respond to Ben, right? I mean, I'm typically what I have seen is there's more of a chances that there is a transient attacker who's probably hosting an evil twin, or there's a device which is compromised, rather than an attacker which is always persistent, in which case there's nothing to do. So I think handling the case of either picking a timer which is random, or basically having trust on first use, where you pin the information and next time come in and you see a change, then you have some suspicion. So there could be various ways where you could identify that transient. And I think that's far more important case than probably a very less scenario where an attacker has taken over the network and is always there to snoop your DNS traffic.
Thank you, Tiru. Jim Reed, please.
Ben made a very good point there about the differentiation between transient and persistent attackers, and I wonder how we can address that in our documents. Is this something we have to think about more generally, or do we incorporate that into the security considerations of the internet drafts and RFCs that we produce? Maybe have to say, is this particular threat or security defense mechanism will be we consider as reasonably safe against a transient attacker, but will not succeed against a persistent malicious attacker. And I think it might be good to have gradations in terms of the responses and the behaviours and the risks and the threats. There's probably going to be need for a matrix for that kind of stuff, and I'm not sure how best to encapsulate that and document it. Does it go into individual drafts, or does it have to go into a separate document all on its own?
Thank you, Jim. Andrew Campling.
I think Jim made a good point, and I was just going to say, would it make sense to expand the content of the I can't remember what it's called, the user requirements document the working group recently adopted to incorporate those sort of different scenarios?
So let me speak to that one, Andrew. I think since that group, so the status of that document where it ended up was sort of adopted for working group info only, and that we wouldn't continue to like expand upon it as a group. Certainly the author's going to make fixes and stuff like that and put stuff in there. But if I can suggest, if we want to do new things like that, then let's try to do them in smaller documents which capture that issue. And then ultimately, if we need to roll these things up when they get consensus into a larger thing, we can do that. But it's a little bit easier to deal with them in isolation. That's my 5 cents.
Thank you, Glenn. Tommy Pauly, please.
Yeah, I mean, just to that point, yeah, I agree that these type of considerations belong in smaller documents or in the existing documents. I think this particular point we were talking about probably just does belong in the security considerations or something as part of DDR. And then the reason I got in queue, I was looking at the PR. And so when we're talking about the transient attacker case, you know, what we're trying to do by reconfirming this discovery process is make sure that we didn't get tricked on the first time when we learned about this encrypted resolver, and maybe it's an evil encrypted resolver. And so we keep trying to reconfirm it, presumably, again, using that unsecure path. What stops the transient attacker from then blocking the message later? Because the PR currently says, you know, we should repeat the process and confirm if it's still valid, and we must stop using the encrypted resolver if it's no longer designated. So this allows essentially any attacker to just drop one of the discovery responses and get the clients to tear down their encrypted channels. So I think it'd be great to have something where we can eventually ratchet up to a level of security where we do not fall back down. I don't know what the answer for that is, but I'm a bit concerned about that attack. I see Ben is in the queue, so let's talk about it.
Sure. So as a matter of threat modeling, I have assumed that any adversary who is capable of selectively dropping packets on the network is also capable of injecting packets, and therefore they are the attacker you described is the persistent attacker.
Okay, so that's the persistent case.
Yeah. And so we are already hosed. But that's not the only possible threat model, but that's the threat model that I've been working with in my head.
Right. I guess it does bring up the concern that that could also happen by accident. I could end up not getting the response because there's packet loss or some other thing, and
sure. Right. I mean, you know, DNS does have retry. It doesn't.
Yep.
You know, it doesn't just try once and fail. But that's certainly a reasonable point. You could have a 20-second outage, and that would have some effect on the client state machine that I think probably is not well described in the current text. We can certainly think about how to provide better guidance there. You briefly discussed ratcheting up to a stronger trust level, and that's certainly an interesting idea.
Ben, it might be helpful, Ben, if you could actually draft up for us your threat models that you're working with when you're evaluating.
Sure. I mean, I do think that the text,
yeah, it's pretty good.
attempts to do that. I guess I would, if people want more detail, I would encourage them to review the text specifically, and if they think there's a missing element there, then we can certainly add it. On the topic of ratcheting up, I guess there's an interesting sort of broader use case question here. Can you imagine connecting to a network and at some point, surfacing to the user, hey, it looks like this network is using Verizon Fios secure DNS. Do you want to always use Verizon Fios secure DNS when you're on this network? And then user enables, and now you're somehow locked into a more secure configuration. I hadn't really considered that use case.
Right, and I think that also works to the implementations that do have lists of things that they recognize as risk.
You cut off, Tommy.
Yep, that was me, Deco. I was just going to say, we do have examples of implementations that have lists of resolvers that they trust or have used previously, and maybe those ones are opportunities to be a bit more sticky.
Thank you, Tommy. Elliot Lear, please.
Hi there. Okay, so 2 points. First, I like the idea of ratcheting up, but as that sounds like a draft into itself, which somebody could write. And when they do write it, it would be useful to look at 2 different use cases. The ratcheting up where there is a common user interface, a la your phone or your laptop, and the more and the IoT use case where if it's a wearable or something like that, where it doesn't really have a convenient user interface, what would be the recommendations there? The second point I have is I think these conversations in open mic would really do better in having been prepared for on the agenda, so that everybody, because otherwise it seems like we're all winging it here.
Yes, I'll observe in part that Ecker also was kind of dual booked for meetings during this session, and he's in the queue. But before we move on, I want to address that specific comment. We had anticipated that some of the earlier discussion was going to take longer and that we wouldn't be filling a full hour of open mic time. I do agree with you that we're probably not focused enough on this, and we might be heading toward giving you back some time before the end of the session. But now that Ecker is back, we certainly want to hear his comments.
Well, thank you. I guess I'm personally a little skeptical of the you're on a network of this type. You always want to do this in the future. That we found attempting to determine what kind of network people are on, and then persisting those things fairly fraught. And in particular, it seems like it's not quite clear to me how that really works, because the attacker is quite likely to take control enough of the network to attempt to impersonate, attempt to claim you're not on the network where you've just ratcheted it up. So I'm not really sure how that works. So, well, I understand certainly the desire to do some kind of tofu. I think I have to understand the mechanics better before I'd be pretty optimistic about it.
Thank you, Ecker. I'm going to toss it back to Glenn now to see whether he kind of agrees with the conclusion that we've probably done about all the useful work that we can do unprompted here in the working group. And we'll probably move towards the close of the agenda.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. Good morning, everybody. So I think this is the most subdued I've ever seen ADD. I think it may be a factor of the early morning here on the West Coast.
Before you go on, Glenn, Daniel has a comment, so let's give a chance for that, please.
Yeah, hi. I just want to to understand why Ecker does not think that any user interaction is possible or likely to happen. Is that a problem of interface data missing, or is that we cannot rely on the end user, or yeah, that's basically I'd like to understand a little bit more what he thinks, why he thinks those kind of interactions not possible.
Sure, and I can try again. So as I understand it, the setting is that I join network 1, and and I discover that there's a secure resolver on network 1, and then I get some interface that says, hey, if you're on network 1, do you want to like permanently use a secure resolver on network 1? And so I think there's several problems here. One is actually determining which network you're on turns out to be like really kind of annoying and difficult, and we struggle with that a lot. And so we have a lot of heuristics around it, but like we'd be reluctant to pin on that until we can be absolutely certain. The second is that an attacker who controls that network, the network you join, seems likely to be able to pretend you're not on network 1. And so in the precise case when you need the security, the attacker will be able to downgrade you. So I'm not sure how that works either. So I mean, I'm not saying this can't be done. Maybe someone has like an idea that would work, and I'm certainly open to it. But those are the things I would be looking for to evaluate such an idea.
Thank you, Ecker. Daniel, do you? Oh, okay. Fred Baker, please. So video is coming online.
And now that I've got my computer configured to actually do the right thing, I'm with Ecker on this. The one question that I would ask that so Daniel commented, so he's worried about end user behavior. In at least 50% of cases, the end user is going to be a computer that is being accessed by somebody else. And I think it's going to be quite common to have the user of the service be a computer at each end of things, or a computer process. So I would not focus on asking a person to do something. I would focus on having some kind of policy that a user might apply.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you. Tommy Baldi, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just agreeing with what Fred said. I just want to be clear that when I was describing before kind of ratcheting up the security, I don't think that basing this on any type of UI interaction is probably the right direction. Like so far, the only example I can think of where it's a very clear case is that we should allow an implementation to say that if I have insecurely discovered a particular resolver that I already have an affinity to and I trust, that I do not need to reprobe every 5 minutes, let's say, or allow that to be downgraded if it is working fine and I already have a strong reason to use it. So I think we can come up with other mechanisms, but I think that trying to dive into UI here is a dangerous route.
Okay, thank you, Tommy. Thierry, please.
So I think if you look at the resolver attestation information that we had in the draft, it talks about cryptographic assertions that would prove that it's actually hosted by a legal entity, and that doesn't require any UI, and the client can make a decision whether it's actually hosted by an attacker or a legal entity. But yeah, the legal entity could itself be having a bad privacy policy, and it could be snooping on the data, but it reduces the threat vectors where it's very easy in today's world for an attacker to get an public IP or a domain and just host a server and act as an evil twin, or compromise one of the devices and host an encrypted DNS server. So it at least addresses those kind of scenarios, and it does not involve any UI, so it works even for headless IoT devices.
Thank you, Thierry.
Okay, I think that's it. Okay, everybody. The last bit I'll share before we let everybody go, we have not yet planned out any kind of interim meeting between IETF 110 and IETF 111. So stay tuned. There's been some discussion, but at this point, no plans have been laid down, so nothing to announce there. And then the rest of it, I'll say, as we're moving into the phase where we now have 2 working group documents that have been adopted for active work. We've got 1 adopted for informational purposes. Those are hosted in the group's GitHub repositories. But let's make an extra effort, because and this has been discussed in other lists, but I wanted to sort of say to the group, let's make sure we make a conscious effort to keep the discussions active on the list and not just slip, because it would be easy to do, slip into doing everything over on GitHub, because that excludes people and it doesn't allow for full participation by the group. So just be conscious of it and make an extra effort to be extra verbose onto the list about this stuff. So thank you. Any last words, David or Eric?
None from me. Give Eric a chance to buzz in.
Nothing on my side.
Okay, well then, good day, everybody, and we'll see you at IETF 111, if not before. Bye-bye.